Northern Europe in the late Viking Age was not only a world of raids and longships. Beneath the familiar image of warriors and sagas existed systems of belief and ritual so extreme that even medieval writers struggled to record them. What survives is fragmented, distorted by fear, shame, and deliberate silence. But enough evidence remains to show that Viking society was held together not just by honor and kinship, but by rituals designed to break, reshape, and bind human identity. In the far north, communities gathered inside sealed longhouses during winter, forming circles around rituals that violated their own social rules. Certain forms of magic, especially seer, required men to abandon every cultural marker of masculinity. To practice it was to accept social death in exchange for power. The Norse believed power came through transformation, and transformation required humiliation, vulnerability, and loss of identity. These practitioners were feared, consulted in crises, and despised in daily life. They lived on the margins, essential yet untouchable. Ritual violence extended far beyond magic. At sacred centers like Uppsala, mass ceremonies took place at fixed intervals, involving entire communities. Participation was not optional. To refuse was to risk exile or death. These events normalized atrocity through collective involvement. When everyone participated, guilt became shared, and shared guilt became social glue. Over generations, children raised witnessing sacrifice grew into adults who accepted it as part of the natural order. The psychological mechanics were sophisticated. By forcing communities to witness and celebrate death together, ritual leaders created trauma bonding on a massive scale. Questioning the ritual became equivalent to betraying family, ancestors, and gods. Witnesses described sensory distortions during ceremonies, altered perception, intensified color, strange sounds carried by wind and smoke, whether caused by psychology, environmental factors, or intoxicants. The effect was real to those who experienced it. From this environment emerged one of the most disturbing figures of Viking warfare, the berserker. Contrary to legend, berserkers were not simply warriors who lost control in battle. They were manufactured. The process began in childhood, selecting boys who showed emotional detachment rather than aggression. Training camps were placed in remote forests, away from settlements, where human identity was systematically erased. Names were stripped away. Language was punished. Sensory deprivation and controlled fear exposure dismantled normal psychological responses. Over time, animal behavior replaced human social patterns. Chemical substances derived from plants and fungi altered brain chemistry, suppressing fear and impulse control while amplifying aggression and endurance. These changes were not temporary. Archaeological and biological evidence suggests long-term neurological alteration. Integration with wild animals was not symbolic. Trainees lived alongside predators, learning their behavior, hierarchy, and communication. Survival depended on submission and adaptation. Over time, boundaries between human and animal perception blurred. This state of existence allowed berserkers to function as weapons rather than soldiers. They were deployed, controlled by handlers, and isolated from normal society when not in use. Berserkers inspired terror not just because of their violence, but because of their indifference. Pain, injury, and death no longer held meaning. Witnesses described physical transformations during battle that seemed impossible. Swelling musculature, distorted features, endurance beyond human limits. Whether exaggeration or altered perception, the psychological impact on enemies was devastating. When berserkers aged, the system that created them turned against them. Neurological damage accumulated. Rage states became unpredictable. Most were eventually killed by their own communities or abandoned to the wilderness in what was called the final hunt. They belonged fully to neither human nor animal worlds. Parallel to this destruction of individuality existed another binding force: blood oaths. These were not symbolic gestures of loyalty, but deeply ritualized ceremonies designed to merge identity itself. Participants fasted, purified themselves, and gathered at places associated with death. The goal was the creation of a collective consciousness. Blood was mixed with substances believed to carry emotional memory. Consumption of the mixture created intense psychological effects. Synchronization of movement, shared sensation, and loss of individual boundaries. Participants reported experiencing memories and emotions that were not their own. Secrets became collective property. Betrayal became psychologically impossible because identity itself was shared. Blood-bound groups functioned as single organisms. In battle, they moved with uncanny coordination. They sensed injury and danger across distances. Economically, they pooled wealth and responsibility, creating powerful units that outlived individuals. But the cost was severe. Many could no longer function alone. The death of one was experienced by all. Survivors often spiraled into recklessness, seeking death to reunite with their lost bond. Agricultural survival was reinforced through equally extreme communal rituals. Fertility was seen as a transferable force linking humans, animals, and land. Entire communities participated in symbolic acts intended to direct life energy into crops. These rituals erased privacy and individual shame, replacing them with collective responsibility for survival. When harvests succeeded, the rituals were validated. When they failed, greater sacrifice was demanded. All of this points to a Viking worldview fundamentally different from modern assumptions. Power did not come from stability, but from transformation. Identity was not fixed but malleable. Suffering was not meaningless, but potentially useful. Rituals were not merely religious expression, but technologies, systems for controlling behavior, emotion, loyalty, and violence. Even the most infamous execution rituals were performances designed to communicate meaning, dominance, divine favor, and terror. Whether every account is literal or embellished, the consistency across sources suggests that ritualized violence was used deliberately as psychological warfare. The Viking world was not uniquely cruel by historical standards, but it was uniquely honest about the price of power. Community survival demanded participation. Identity demanded sacrifice. Those who refused were cast out. Those who accepted were transformed, sometimes into leaders, sometimes into monsters. When Christianity spread through Scandinavia, it did not merely replace gods. It dismantled systems that relied on shared guilt, ritual trauma, and enforced participation. Many of these practices vanished not because they were forgotten, but because they were too dangerous to remember. What remains is a shadow history, one that reminds us that civilization has always been built not only on law and belief, but on the manipulation of fear, belonging, and identity itself.